Thanks, Corey. Moving on, just to quickly introduce our speakers who are all with us right now. So today we have Ollie Munyon of Global Forest Coalition and also the Geoengineering Monitor editorial team, who will present on the new Home Alliance toolkit that we are launching today, and also highlight one of the real world projects that's happening in India right now. Following Ollie's presentation will be Kwame Kaponzo of the Global Forest Coalition and also the Home Alliance Africa Working Group, who will be discussing about the impacts of industrial tree plantations linked to carbon dioxide removal. And lastly, we have Almus Ernstein from Biofuel Watch, and she will be talking about some of the existing land-based geoengineering projects and the opposition to those by civil society. And again, we have a question and answer and discussion portion at the end of all the presentations. But along the way, if you have a comment or a question, feel free to use the chat function, type it there. We can circle back to it later during the Q&A. So to give a short context and background, so last year, the Hands of Mother Earth Alliance published 3 toolkits on geoengineering to strengthen knowledge and advocacy on challenging geoengineering proposals that are advancing rapidly in both policy spaces and through outdoor experiments. These toolkits, they offer critical analysis of geoengineering schemes, policies, and governance, and also, of course, the global resistance to geoengineering. So we have a general toolkit on geoengineering. We have a solar geoengineering toolkit and a marine geoengineering toolkit. They're all available in the Home Alliance website. And we can also share a link to these resources later via chat. And so today we are officially launching the land-based geoengineering toolkit as part of this series. So this toolkit on land-based geoengineering will unpack the different land-based geoengineering schemes, the environmental, biodiversity, climate, and social risks that land geoengineering pose. Of course, it also tackles real-world projects and actors driving their expansion, and why these approaches threaten real climate solutions. So to discuss more on, to present more on this very new land-based geoengineering toolkit, I am passing the microphone to my colleague, Ollie.
Hi, everybody, and thank you very much, Nikki, for that introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. So yes, hopefully you can see the end of the toolkit. There we go, back to the beginning. Yeah, so as Nikki said, my name's Ollie Munyon. I am the Global Forest Coalition's or the co-coordinator of the Global Forest Coalition's Climate Justice and Forests campaign. I am also a member of the Geoengineering Monitor editorial team. So to start off with, it's great that we have this new resource from the Home Alliance. Yeah, Nikki already gave a great introduction to the sort of purpose behind this, but this is really meant to be an accessible document that we can use in our advocacy efforts to help us get the message out and raise awareness of what the issues are. And the toolkit starts with some very sort of basic information, but also quite important in terms of what it is that we're talking about when we talk about land-based geoengineering and the distinction between carbon dioxide removal and schemes that aim to remove carbon from the atmosphere, and then of course solar radiation modification, a sort of different suite of technologies that aim essentially to reflect solar radiation away from the Earth. We look at specific technologies, so the main ones that are being developed and deployed at the moment. We're going to hear a lot more about these throughout the webinar as well. But as a very basic introduction, we have bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. You will find lots more information in all of these links. This is very much a brief introduction, and we really hope that you'll use the toolkits throughout your networks to be able to show people where more information can be found. So this is basically the idea that you could basically burn biomass, capture the carbon that's released from it, and then sequester it underground, usually into geological formations. Similar to BECCS, to bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, we have biochar and bio oil sequestration. So biochar is another way of burning biomass, except instead of capturing the carbon from the smokestack, like with BECCS, the idea is that the carbon remains in solid form in the feedstock, and we're going to hear more about this as well. Bio oil sequestration is basically the oil that is produced as a byproduct of biochar production is then sequestered and injected underground for storage. That's the aim of these technologies. A more recent sort of introduction to the market is biomass burial and geological storage. So this is one that is less developed than the others, but essentially quite straightforward technology, at least in terms of biomass burial. So another word for biomass burial is wood vaults. And essentially what's happening is that a big hole is dug, biomass is harvested, and then the hole is filled and then covered over. And the idea is it's essentially landfilling wood, but the idea is that it's covered in an anoxic environment where the decomposition rates are much, much slower. So that's the idea with this particular technology, and it is ramping up in terms of the attention it's being given and its role in carbon markets, as we will get onto. Another big area that we focus on, and in fact, if you join the second webinar later today, there'll be a presentation on genetically engineered trees and plants. And essentially, what these genetic engineers are trying to do is to change plants and trees so that either they grow more quickly in order to absorb more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, or decompose much more slowly. And I'm sure people are familiar with the vast number of issues that surround genetic engineering, and this is one really clear link with land-based geoengineering, particularly around the expansion of industrial tree plantations, which brings me on to afforestation and reforestation. So although it's not necessarily considered a geoengineering technique, it certainly is very strong linked to carbon dioxide removal. The idea that you can use industrial tree plantations to draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Usually, when from a CDR perspective, when we're talking about reforestation and afforestation, a lot of the time it is to do with industrial tree plantations. That's actually what is being talked about in this context. Other technologies we look at in the briefing are enhanced weathering. This is essentially mimicking Earth's natural weathering processes, where rocks break down and absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And there are various schemes looking at either new mining operations to spread crushed rocks onto agricultural farms, for example, or using tailings, the waste from existing mining operations. Again, all would have to be done at an absolutely enormous scale in order to have climate relevant impacts. Direct air capture is possibly the technology that gains the most attention, at least from a sort of media perspective, when it comes to carbon dioxide removal and land-based geoengineering. But essentially, what they're trying to achieve there is very, very difficult, because it's trying to suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And although there is, as we know, far too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's still actually at very small concentrations. And so, using big fans in order to draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in that way is actually very technically challenging, but also energy intensive as a method. And so, generally speaking, what we're seeing now is the sort of the hype investment around direct air capture waning as the realization grows that maybe this technology isn't going to be at all suitable for what it's proposed for. We also have carbon capture and storage, so CCS, and carbon capture storage utilization and storage, CCUS. Again, these aren't strictly considered geoengineering technologies, but many land-based geoengineering technologies rely on them very heavily. Bioenergy with carbon capture and storage being the most obvious one. And so when we talk about BECCS, also all of the issues around CCS are in play here, are a significant factor. And also the fact that CCS, I have been following the CCS issue for at least a couple of decades, and it seems like it's always 10, 15 years away, the rollout of this technology. That time frame never changes, and that has been the same for decades now. And so that is one of the fundamental problems with any technology that is dependent on CCS, on carbon capture and storage. Finally, we look at a short bit on the solar radiation management technologies. And so these are less relevant from a land-based geoengineering perspective, but the kinds of things that this involves is basically anything that would make the Earth more reflective. So probably the best known example is removing boreal forests. The idea being that if you don't have boreal forests, you have snow cover, and snow is more reflective than trees. This is a serious proposal that has been made. Thankfully, it's not being deployed yet, but it's one of the schemes, these similar schemes that are dreamed up in laboratories and boardrooms in order to deal with climate change. So moving further down the briefing, we have a large number of reasons to oppose land-based geoengineering. Many of them are quite similar to what you'll find in the other toolkits because the issues are very similar, whether it's to do with who controls these technologies, the moral hazards, and then, of course, quite specific ones to biodiversity loss in terrestrial ecosystems. We talk about the many different names and faces that land-based geoengineering has, the most obvious ones being carbon dioxide removal, a term that I've used a few times already now. Another one is nature-based solutions that I'm sure, again, will be very familiar to most of you. Net zero and negative emissions, very much tied up in the land-based geoengineering narrative, and similarly, climate intervention and climate restoration. We look at resistance to these sorts of projects, so we're going to hear more about Drax from Almut shortly. Like I said, if you join the second webinar today, then you will hear about the campaign to stop GE trees, and also about Aparam, which is a green steel producer in Brazil that is producing biochar for carbon credit reasons as well. We look at advocacy spaces, so the sort of policy spaces that this work is happening, that the Home Alliance is active in now. So, for example, the UN's Climate Convention, the UNFCCC, and also the IPCC, and notably carbon markets. So, carbon markets are really one of the driving forces behind land-based geoengineering developments at the moment. So far, market-based investments in carbon dioxide removal have been through the voluntary carbon markets, where it's usually companies that are buying carbon removal certificates as part of their net zero pledges or corporate social and environmental responsibility schemes. So yeah, many land-based geoengineering schemes haven't yet made it into the compliance carbon markets. So basically the mandatory or the obligatory carbon markets. So there's that distinction between voluntary carbon markets and mandatory or compliance carbon markets. But it is likely that this will happen quite soon. So, for example, at the end of last year, the EU decided to allow the use of international carbon credits to achieve its 2040 climate target. And biochar was one of the technologies that would be included in that. And so if biochar then does make it into the EU's official carbon trading scheme, the EU ETS, then what we're likely to see is a significant increase again in the number of projects. So a good website to go to for information on carbon dioxide removal and the voluntary carbon markets is this one, cdr.fyi. Yeah, so this basically gives us an indication of how the industry is scaling up and what the effects are so far. So this website is an aggregator of all of the CDR transactions on a large number of different carbon markets. So it basically puts all of the transactions together in one place, and there's a few key pieces of data and analysis that we can draw from this. I should also say that this website doesn't include reforestation and afforestation in its definition of carbon dioxide removal. So this is looking at sort of newer or more technological approaches. But of course, as I've already said, many of these are very highly reliant on industrial plantation schemes, under the guise of afforestation and reforestation. Anyway, so yeah, when we're looking at this, it's only the newer technological approaches. So first of all, I want to show you this graph, which you can find if you log in. And what you have here is a graph of the cumulative tons sold versus tons delivered. So when we talk about a ton of carbon removal credits being sold, it's what has been promised or contracted, whereas the delivered is what the company actually says has been achieved, like in the real world. Regardless of how accurate that claim might be. And so the thing to notice here is that 47 times more carbon removal credits from CDR have been sold than delivered. And what this really shows is how speculative the industry is and the extent to which companies are basing their emissions reduction plans on pure speculation. So if we look at what has been sold, so we're looking at this 47 million figure, moving on to this graph, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage accounts for almost 2/3 of it. And so this largely involves burning wood from power stations, capturing the CO2, capturing the carbon, and then injecting it underground. And as I've already said, the only problem with this is that it still hasn't been proven commercially at scale and faces all of the same issues that CCS faces still today. It's also worth looking at who is making these investments. So if we move down here, we have the top purchasers by removal method. So that this is looking at all of the CDR methods, and you can see Microsoft is way out there in front. And Microsoft also recently announced that it was pausing all of its investments into CDR. There's various reasons given, and of course we can talk about why that might be, but it's obviously going to have very significant impact on the market. Likewise, or similar to Microsoft anyway, a large proportion of the investments are tech sector investments. And so, this reflects the fact that emissions from the tech sector, especially from artificial intelligence and new data centers, are increasing rapidly. And this is why these companies are wanting to offset their emissions in this way. So we've looked at the difference between the credits sold and the credits delivered. So looking at this table, this is basically what they call their leaderboard of companies that have sold carbon removal credits. And what I want to show you here is that 7 of the top 10 companies are producing these credits with bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. Yeah, so this is the top one here, and you can see in there power stations such as Stockholm Exergi, such as Ørsted. Stockholm Exergi is in Sweden, Ørsted in Denmark. Fidelis, which is a new power station that's proposed in Louisiana, in the US. And so these are projects that haven't actually happened yet. There are no sales from these projects. They've just been promised. But if you look at tons delivered, the leaderboard becomes very different. So now 7 of the top 10 and all of the top 6 companies are doing so through biochar. So biochar is the most attractive CDI investment at the moment, as it's basically the only one that can be delivered at any kind of scale and at a relatively low price compared to the other approaches. So compared to BECCS, compared to enhanced weathering, and all of these other ones. So in large part, this is due to the fact that biochar is essentially a rebranding of charcoal, especially if the feedstock that is being used is wood. So while there all are much more advanced technological means of producing biochar, and some companies are doing this, much of what is currently being sold on the voluntary carbon markets is actually produced traditionally through low-tech methods, which is why it can be scaled up, why these credits can be bought readily. So as an example of this, I would like to introduce you to the geoengineering map. And we are going to have a closer look at this company, Varaha, which is currently second in terms of delivered carbon removal credits. This company here, the first one, which is way out ahead in front, Eximad Green, will be discussed in the second webinar today. So again, if you'd like to hear more about that company, please join the second webinar as well. But looking at Varaha as an indicative example, we are going to go to the geoengineering map. So this is closely linked to the geoengineering monitor site, which hopefully you're familiar with. And it currently has over 2,000 entries covering the whole range of geoengineering technologies. So you can filter the different technologies that we're looking for. So for example, if we clear everything except greenhouse gas removal or carbon dioxide removal, and then we clear everything except for biochar. So we only want to look at biochar projects. This is just a very quick demonstration of how to use the map. And then we were to have a look at what's going on in India. We would see this project here, which is Varaha's project in Gujarat. So Varaha has a number of different projects on the go. But its most emblematic one, if you like, is this project that's taking place in the Bani grasslands in Gujarat. So it's sort of being used as like a poster project by the company and by the industry as a whole to show the positive benefits of these kind of projects that can have. So yeah, Google is a major investor in this particular project, and in fact, one of Microsoft's last investments before pausing its investments was into Varaha, not necessarily this specific project, but into the company as a whole, because the company recently completed a major investment round. So yeah, on the map, you'll find lots more information, links to further resources, etc. But essentially what this project involves is it's paying thousands of community members to harvest an invasive bush, an invasive plant called Prosopis, which is essentially invading the grassland ecosystem and making life much harder for pastoralists, for livestock farmers. And so the idea is that you would pay the communities themselves to harvest this invasive wood and then turn it into biochar, which is then used to improve grassland soils and then sold as carbon offsets, which sounds great, right, on the face of it. In fact, if you go to Varaha's website, you'll see there it's investors, Microsoft, Google, and others. And then we look at their projects. Yeah, and it's all community-led biochar, thousands of farmers involved. You can see the traditional production method in the background here. There's lots of information on well, here you go, the dual benefit approach tackling ecosystem degradation with carbon sequestration. But the thing is, when you dig a bit further into the project, and I should actually say that we are investigating this company more thoroughly. We're at the beginning of that work, so this is a very brief example of the kind of thing that we're looking into. But there are clearly a number of issues that need to be investigated. So first of all, there's the issue of the fact that charcoal production was actually one of the primary livelihood strategies for many communities in the region. And it's pretty clear that basically instead of producing charcoal to be sold for domestic energy uses, the producers will be paid to produce the biochar instead. And so it's not actually clear what impact that would have on those charcoal producers. Would it potentially displace charcoal production to other areas? Is it the case that instead of charcoal producers directly benefiting from the sale of their charcoal, there's now this middle person, Varaha, and so the benefits from that livelihood strategy are actually having to be shared between, particularly this big company, Varaha. Another issue that I think is significant is the fact that their local implementation partner, so the NGO that this is being done through, is quite open about the fact that it's actually planting trees to offset the methane emissions generated when the biochar or the charcoal is produced. So this gets a little bit technical, but essentially in carbon accounting methodologies for biochar, carbon dioxide isn't accounted for as it's assumed that the feedstock, the wood, is renewable. So it'll just get absorbed straight away. It's the same for other forms of bioenergy generation. But methane emissions are accounted for because biochar production or charcoal production results in higher methane emissions than if wood is just burned. But when you produce it traditionally, there's basically no way that you can capture the methane. It's not technical enough. Where methane is captured, it's usually flared or burned off. In the case with slightly more sophisticated production methods, so you turn the methane into carbon dioxide, which just released in the atmosphere, and then you ignore it. But because in this example in the Bani grasslands is still a very traditional production method, they are acknowledging the fact that significant methane emissions are being produced. They are then planting trees in order to offset those emissions. So basically what we have is two levels of offsetting. First of all, you have Google offsetting its emissions by buying the biochar credits, and then the biochar producers are offsetting their own emissions through tree planting, which is not something that is made obvious on any of the websites. So how this can be considered high integrity carbon removal is absolutely beyond me. So yeah, just to finish on Varaha. So for example, the danger here, in my opinion, is that projects like Varaha's in the Bani grassland, which on the face of it do seem to have community benefits, are relatively small scale. They're actually used to obscure the much bigger geoengineering efforts that have very little community benefits and could also be harmful. So Varaha claims to have access to almost 1 million acres of land. And as we see here from their website, they are also involved in afforestation projects. And there's basically a lot less information on what it's planning to do with the funding that it's currently raising and the huge amount of land that it has access to. So returning briefly to the briefing, we've picked out a couple of specific projects. I won't dwell on them because a number of them I've already mentioned and we will hear about later. We have details about the Home Manifesto, which has recently been relaunched, and we very much encourage people and groups to sign on to that and join the growing movement against geoengineering. And then finally, there are useful resources, further reading, and then ideas for what you can do to support the work of the Home Alliance and get involved in this advocacy work. So yeah, that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Great presentation. Thanks, Ollie. Again, if you have comments, clarifications, questions, we have a Q&A portion after all the presentations, but you feel free to drop your thoughts via chat. We can return to it later. For now, we will pass the floor to Kwame to speak about the impacts of industrial tree plantations linked to carbon dioxide removal. Kwame, floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Can you help me with the slide, please? My name is Kwame. I'm coordinating the extractive industries, tourism, and infrastructure campaign at the Global Forest Coalition, and also co-coordinate the Hands Off Mother Earth Alliance African Working Group. Yeah, so I'm going to speak on the impact of industrial tree plantations linked to the carbon dioxide removals. Next, please. So my focus will be on the impact and a little bit looking at what industrial plantations look like and also the impact associated. I will be focusing on carbon dioxide. What is it? I think Oli has said it a lot, but I'll come back on it and present on two technologies. And also we'll be looking at the concept of plantationocene and geoengineering, and we'll conclude. So on the introduction, I would like to come back on the climate context, the climate change context, saying that climate change continues to impact the nature and peoples. We continue to see droughts, floods, coastal erosion, water scarcity, temperature rising, biodiversity loss, etc. And we also seeing the climate solution narrative that are promoting forced solutions. And those forced solutions include nature-based solution, carbon market, REDD+, carbon offsetting projects. And all those projects could lead to the plantations, And among those four solutions, there are geoengineering technologies, and looking back to colonial and slavery epoch, the economy was based on plantations, mainly cotton, sugarcane, and the plantations that the European or states, they plant just to have profit. So those plantations led to land dispossession and people's exploitation. So today we are seeing extractivism and exploitation and expropriation that are the main drivers of colonialism. So colonialism continues today, and it's expressing itself through extractivism, expropriation, and exploitation. So we said that the first solutions that are driven by colonialism are non-solution. They are not a solution for climate change. So having that said, let's look at the plantation, the impact of plantation. Next slide, please. The impact of plantations. Next slide. Yeah, so the sacrifice zones. So the plantation, what is it? What it look like? So I want to present the sacrifice zones as a zone characterized by industrial pollution, soil pollution, air and water pollution. You see clearly that industrial plantations for energy production are all over the global south, in Latin America and Caribbean, in Africa and Asia. They are all over, and also it's impacting the health of human and also the health of environment, and communities are suffering. So the sacrifice zones are zones that have been sacrificed in the benefit of investors, and the investors are profiting more than the community. So the use of chemicals impact the human health, the use of chemicals destroying the living beings, the other living beings. And also, we've seen that the plantation expansion is a way of persistence of the colonial legacy. I've talked about colonialism, so it's a continuation. So from the plantation ocean to today, it's a colonial legacy that we are seeing. Next slide. So I just want to show you some examples of plantation in Mozambique, in Zambezia. You have Portucel Group that grabbed 173,000 hectares for eucalyptus plantation, and they destroyed communities' livelihood, food insecurity, because community use that land to cultivate their crops for their food, but then eucalyptus is replacing the food. They are cultivating food for machine, not for human. So soil contamination because of the use of chemicals, biodiversity loss, loss of landscape, and displacements. Communities have been displaced in Zambezi, and also loss of traditional knowledge and also traditional practices. And lots of social problems are there because moving from one community to another, it creates conflict. So that is the impact of plantations in Mozambique, especially eucalyptus plantation in Mozambique. Next slide. We're going to see the examples of plantations in Uganda, where the eucalyptus has replaced the trees, the forests, the native forests in Uganda. So green resources in Uganda produce charcoal in commercial quantity. So they took over 347 hectares in Busonga forest to produce charcoal, and it means biodiversity loss for communities, loss of food security, food sovereignty as well, and forest degradation because the primary forest is destroyed, and loss of energy sovereignty. Why? Because community in Buzunga, in Uganda, they use the traditional biomass to have shackles. Then they were kicked off, and they don't have the wood anymore to have their shackles. But the shackle produced by green resources is a commercial shackle. It's a commercial shackle. So they sell those shackles out from Uganda, and it impacts hugely the communities in Uganda. Next slide. Yes, so the social and environmental injustices is under plantations. So forced displacements, people and communities are displaced. They don't have livelihood anymore. So their land has been taken. So they move away from their lands. They cannot cultivate anymore to feed themselves. Intra and inter-community conflicts because some of them are bribed because the entrance into the communities by the investors. Sometimes they bribe the community members, and it creates conflicts between the owners of the lands and those bribes. And also entire community conflicts, they move from one community to another. So it creates a lot of conflicts between communities. And sometimes forests are destroyed because they seem like that forest is not enough for them to to make profit. So they clear the forest and plant a lot eucalyptus and plant timber. And because of the use of chemicals, water, soil, and air is polluted. So the social and environmental justice is obvious, is there. So just to share that. Next slide. And human rights are violated because of plantations. The right to adequate food, the right to adequate housing, the right to education, to health, to social security, to participate in cultural, yes, because some of the communities have their cultural practices and religious practices in the forest. So the forest is destroyed, and the sacred space are destroyed, so they don't have that cultural contact anymore. So that right is violated. So the right to work, the right to water and sanitation, the right to live in a safe environment is violated because of plantation. Next. So yeah, so we've seen the impact of plantation. Now, what is the link of that plantation to CDR? And as I said, CDR, carbon dioxide removal, was presented by Oli, but here I'm going to present on two technologies. Next slide, which are bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, and also biochar. So what is carbon dioxide removal? As Oli said, is a technology that is put in place to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. So is one of the main proposals of geoengineering. So there are two categories: carbon dioxide removers and solar radiation management. Management, we say modification or manipulation. So they are just manipulating the nature. So CDR, the main technologies that are that lead to plantations that I want to talk here is BECCS, bioenergy with carbon capture, and biochar. So these technologies could lead to monoculture plantations because they need biomass to function. They need a lot of wood, and those can be planted through monoculture plantation to feed the machine. So I think Oli has spoke about it already, about BECCS, which is CDR technology that are in place to capture carbon dioxide from bio energy, and also that can be captured through the system of carbon capture and storage, and also it can be reused. So the CCUS is in place to do that. And also biochar is a technology that can remove the CO2, but then it's a technology that offers the possibility to hold that CO2 into the ground. Next. Yeah, so the concept of plantationocene look at the ecological destruction and social inequalities. As I said, in the colonial and slavery periods or epoch, they use a lot of land. They dispossess communities from their land to plant. So it creates a lot of disparity, social problems. So plantation ocean, it critiques how monoculture plantations were imposed through colonialism and slavery. So that mindset is brought to this epoch, to this period, to still continue imposing colonialism, imposing imperialism, and destroying peoples and nature. So it carry out exploitation. So the use of nature, land, water, without any responsibility. So the use of people without taking into consideration their health, their social security, their well-being. So it's total disaster. So the responsibility in exploitation is not there. Nkrumah said, exploitation without responsibility is imperialism. So they just want to exploit either nature or people. It carry out also expropriation, because land is dispossessed, so community land is grabbed just to plant. Not that plantation will benefit the communities, but of course, just they plant to make more profits. And in regard to plantation ocean and compared to BECS, to the bioenergy and with carbon capture and storage, it's like the colonial want to repeat the same system, or they are repeating anyway the same system. So BECS rely on vast monoculture plantations of fast-growing crops, like eucalyptus, for instance. So it's a repetition of the colonial system. So it's based on extractivism, looting of our woods, and the trading of our natural resources, of woods, of our biomass, and destroying local communities' economy and stability. So extractivism is there, and exploitation also is there, using nature and without any responsibility, using people. And expropriation is there. Expropriation, land grabbing, livelihood extortion, territories disposition. So today we are seeing local communities and indigenous peoples' territories being grabbed for plantations only, and extermination. So the 4 E's are there. Extermination means simply the killing of people, the killing of communities, the killing of activists, because we are fighting back, because we are defending our rights, we are defending our communities. We got killed simply, and that's extermination. Extermination of species, killing of other living beings, and destroying other living beings just for profit and plantation. So killing of cultural practices and cultural values is a destruction of the being that we are, destruction of nature, and the rights of nature is no more there. So plantation ocean and BECS is similar. So that's why we don't want to allow BECS into the global south. We don't want to allow BECS into Africa, because it's a source of destruction. It's a source of destruction of the good life. Next slide. Just to compare the plantation ocean and BECS. If you look at the land use, we check the BECS. So millions of hectares are required to implement BECS, and it's in competition with food production. We want land, or we need our land to produce food for ourselves. to feed ourselves, not food for machine. But BEX is producing food for machine by planting crops and planting trees. So we said enough. It is enough. We can't continue like this. If you also check the risks on social legacy, if BEX needs to be implemented, so there is a risk of reproducing inequalities, climate solutions, as I said. So green colonialism is still there, it's coming, and with BEX, it will continue destroying peoples. So next slide, just to conclude quickly. Yeah, in conclusion, like I said, the plantation ocean help us see BEX not just as a technical climate solution, but as a potential continuation of plantation logic, monoculture, dispossession, and unequal burden. So it's also a distraction. It's a pure distraction from real climate action. So that distraction must stop. And now there is a need for justice-centered approach to counter geoengineering in order to avoid the same exploitative pattern and shape the modern world. And community farming, farmer agroecology practices, indigenous traditional territories that resist monoculture and exploitation have to be recognized and promoted as climate solutions. So we need to continue that fight. We need to continue promoting real solutions on the ground to counter monoculture plantations. As we are fighting monoculture plantations, we are also blocking the implementation of BEX because they will need land to go about that project. They will need biomass to go about that project. So let's continue the fight to block them by securing our land, by securing the nature, and protecting ourselves. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Kwame. So we'll pass on the floor to Almo to speak about the more like what some of the more popular land-based engineering projects happening right now and the resistance of civil society against it. Over to you, Almo.
Sorry, thank you. Sorry, one moment. I'm not at the first one. Yes, thank you. So let me find my slideshow again. There we go. I think slideshow. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a trouble with my sharing. Okay, there we go. Apologies. So I've been asked to speak about really the two biggest BEX proposals involving biomass burning, one in the UK by Drugs Group and one in Sweden by Stockholm Exergy. Right, let's get straight into this, talking about drugs. So most of this is against drugs. Biofuel, I work with Biofuel Watch based, I'm based in the UK, and campaigning against drugs has been kind of our long-standing and probably biggest campaign ever, including recently in California. And the second webinar, my colleague Gary will speak about that. Right. who are Drax? They are a power company that runs the world's biggest wood burning plant in England. They burn 7.5 million tons of imported wood pellets per year. Each ton is made from 2 tons of 2 tons of freshly harvested wood. 75% of the pellets come from the southeastern USA. The rest comes from from Canada, the Baltic states, Portugal, and Brazil. And they are also the world's second biggest pellet producer, with pellet plants in the southeastern US and in Western Canada. A very quick look at where the wood comes from. So first about Drax's pellet plants in British Columbia. Photos from recent years taken by Conservation North, really showing how Drax has for years used tall trees from clear cutting of primary and old growth forests in that province, and that is continuing. Most of those pellets are exported to Japan and South Korea. And most, as I said, 75% of Drax's pellets that they are burning comes from, excuse the typo, comes from the southeastern USA, and many of them come from clear cutting of forests like these ones at the top, shown at the top, like really beautiful, biodiverse, not old growth forests, but really precious forests. Now get on to BECCS. So quick overview of what works and what doesn't so far work with BECCS. So, because there's something about is BECCS proven or not, well, let's see. What's been demonstrated is carbon dioxide capture from ethanol fermentation, nothing to do with wood burn, nothing to do with Drax. I'm just going to mention it. And also carbon dioxide capture from biomethane production. They have been proven, not on a vast scale, but they can do it. It's technically fairly, not easy, but easier than other stuff. And from waste incineration, the record set is 40,000 tons a year of carbon capture, CO2 capture. What has never been demonstrated is CO2 capture from burning biomass, wood and other biomass, wood crops, whatever. Nor the long-term secure storage of CO2 in geological reservoirs. It's easy to pump it somewhere, but making sure it stays there long-term, that's quite another thing, and it has not been demonstrated over the long term. So Drax and BECCS. 6 years ago, over 6 years ago, Drax announced that they want to become the world's first carbon negative business, run the first carbon negative power station through BECCS. They did that at what was the Madrid Climate COP. And just before that, they had partnered with a startup company in England called Sea Capture. Sea Capture really tried, they got 1.4 million in UK government subsidies for that. They tried to capture 1 ton of CO2 a day. And Sea Capture really tried to use that to develop a carbon capture method that is more effective, they're more efficient than carbon capture from power stations, so far coal power stations really, than the existing ones. Okay. Very funny, I couldn't help myself, but Drax then started saying they were going to make something like fizzier beer with all the carbon dioxide captured, carbon negative beer or whatnot. But in fact, the CO2 they captured wasn't clean enough, it was way too pure, so breweries didn't want it. And that's what happened to this startup company, mass redundancies last year, did not work. Then in 2021, Drax partnered with Mitsubishi, and they tried to capture 250 tons of carbon dioxide a day from one of the biomass units. The total captured ever in total were 27 tons, so hardly anything, and it went straight back into the atmosphere. It was just a very small test. So what then? Just rushing through this. And I know, January 2024, Drax gets development or planning consent for a unit to capture up to 8 million tons of CO2 a year. The year before, in fact, Drax had said that they were suspending their so far non-existing investment in BECCS. June last year, the UK government grants Drax 4 years further subsidies for about half the amount of wood burned currently, right? But still 4 more years, but without saying a word about the need for carbon capture. So just now this month, Drax announced that it had basically ditched BECCS plants. That's how it was reported. Put them on ice for for however, yeah, gone, finished. What had we done about this? What was Biofuel Watch's involvement? Well, we've been campaigning against Drax for a very, very long time, with street protests, with coalitions. I mean, I could go on all for an hour speaking about that, and I won't. Joint sign-on letters at political advocacy, and we actually put together a 100-page objection to that planning application for BECCS that was granted but never pursued. What was it all about? I mean, not what we did, but what Drax did. Why did they all jump through all the hoops of planning consent and then just ditch it or ditch the plans? So, yeah, it's basically all been about continued funding, continued subsidies, continued money for continuing this business as usual, which involves burning vast amounts of trees from some of them from monoculture tree plantations, and many of them from really biodiverse forests. And I should have mentioned that earlier, is that this isn't just a disaster for forests and for the climate, because clearly if you chop down trees and burn the wood, that's bad for the climate. But also, especially in southeastern USA, there have been 18,000 violations of environmental permit rules by Drax's pellet plants alone. So, horrendous pollution for some of for communities that are already, very disadvantaged, far more black communities, and also more deprived, economically deprived communities that are suffering that pollution. Okay, so it's not about BECCS, it's all about attracting more money for a really destructive tree burning business model. Stockholm Exergy, slightly different. There's not been a campaign against that as such. Stockholm Exergy, big energy company, doesn't just do biomass, burns a lot of trees for sure. It's the EU's largest BECCS project. The idea is to capture they want to capture 800,000 tons a year. And that they want to store it as part of the Norwegian Northern Lights carbon storage project, although that's overbooked, i.e. the Northern Lights project, they've partnered with, they've agreed to store a lot more carbon than in the first phase, they actually have capacity for, and this one doesn't come first. How is it being funded? Well, it's loads of money, 180 million from the EU Innovation Fund. Now, I'm not sure, I got different figures here, but from 1.7, or I've seen one figure of even 3 billion euro in Swedish subsidies over 10 up to 15 years, and then recently a $250 million European Investment Bank loan approved. How credible is this project? Yeah, so this particular technology that Stockholm Exergy wants to use has been used for a totally different so in the gas refining sector, but never for capturing carbon from heat and power plants, which when I say existing carbon capture in that sector means coal, really. It hasn't been used before. They did a 1 ton a day pilot project in 2019. We asked about that a while back. They gave minimum information, nothing about the total amount of CO2 captured, just said the longest they ever captures 14 days. Yeah, that was kind of it. And funny enough, the Stockholm Exergy predecessor tried the very same capture technology at the very same power station when it was still burning coal. And that trial was stopped. It seems to have failed. So, is it credible? Well, big question marks. Why are they doing this? Well, again, they're getting loads of subsidies for doing it. I mean, this is a little bit my take, but I think that this company actually, there are people there who want to try and work on a more efficient carbon capture technology. And the way you get subsidies for that at the moment is you claim that you can do it on a vast commercial scale because the subsidies go there and not for small research and development, even though this is what it actually is. It's just research development stuff. Yeah, so, but again, you know, Stockholm Exergy, we don't know so much as with Drax about where the wood they are burning comes from. A lot will come from Sweden, probably a lot from the Baltic states, but they are totally secretive, and yeah. But it's again, you know, it's a bit more, you know, they're probably more ambitious on research and development, but they're also taking the money to continue their current business as usual model. So what are the lessons for campaigners as far as BECCS is concerned? So the real problem is that BECCS claims are used to legitimize burning vast amounts of trees for energy, which harms forests, harms the climate, and very often harms communities. It's about, you know, getting not just legitimizing, but also about getting public money for this business, more subsidies. And I think it's really important, personally, I think it's really important to call out hype when we see it about BECCS. So we've always said, you know, with drugs from when we first looked at it, especially drugs, that, you know, you can't just go from capturing nothing and nobody having proven like how you capture even, say, 100 tons of carbon dioxide from biomass burning to like 4 to 8 million tons without even, you know, trying to make it work and doing your tests and experiments. I mean, that's just nonsense. And I think it's really important to call out the hype around BECCS and not be, you know, not sort of think, oh, I don't know, maybe it suddenly would work. I mean, that just is not credible, not without putting in, you know, years and years and years of research and development. And even then, whether, you know, if it was, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say even then, because the reason it hasn't been proven is that nobody's really put in the work to make it work whatsoever. So there isn't really the business interest in this so far. So yeah, that's it kind of, from me, very dangerous in terms of legitimizing, attracting more subsidies, less dangerous in terms of it ever becoming a realistic large-scale geoengineering technology.
Thank you, Almo. Amazing presentation. Thank you to all our presenters today. So now we have a few minutes to open the floor for discussion. If you have any question, clarification, or comments, feel free to use the raise hand function and speak up. You can also use the chat function to leave any message there. We do have an earlier question asking about, you know, how to block the influence of false solutions, like nature-based solutions. So I would invite our speakers, if you have anything to respond to that, you can speak or also directly respond to the chat message. Yeah, we have a hand. Radhika, please.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks to all the speakers. So I have a question about direct air capture and CCS. So I was just wondering if there are any projects which are combining both of them? And if that happens, would then that make CCS geoengineering? Thanks.
Sorry, combining CCS with, I didn't catch that.
Direct air capture, DAC.
So inviting our speakers, if you have a response to Radhika.
Oh, I have a very quick response, and that is yes. So I think the acronym is DACS, DACCS. But yes, I would be lying if I said I had more information than that. I'm just trying to find the most recent Geoengineering Monitor technology update on direct air capture, because that featured a whole load of companies trying to do exactly what you just said, capture it from the air and then inject it underground. So I will put that in the chat as soon as I've found it.
Please go ahead. You're muted.
Just briefly, I mean, basically, it hasn't gone very well with DAX. It's very energy intensive, and this company that tried to be kind of world leading in Iceland, it turns out that they capture just a tiny, tiny proportion of what they had promised. So yeah, it would be geoengineering, but it's also not going very well for the companies doing it.
Thanks, Ollie and Almo. Do we have any more questions to our speakers, or Kwame?
I want to react. Yes, I want to react on the nature-based solution. I think yes, we can confront them, and we can succeed to stop them if we are strategic enough. Looking at the UNFCCC, the Article 6 is driving the nature-based solution. And also, we have to look at the other convention and see how we can continue challenging the text, because we need to challenge the text and change them from the negotiations. So if we do that, then I'm sure we're going to stop the nature-based solutions on the ground. That is one. Second, we need to be crazy enough to be bold enough to stop on the ground, because sometimes you need to do something crazy. We can react, and we can do actions as we know how to do it. We can do those actions to stop some projects on the ground, but it comes with consequences. But we know those consequences, so we can do that if we want. So it's it's a willingness.
Thank you, Kwame. Please excuse me if I mispronounce your name, but go ahead, Palye.
Yes, only to add to the question about DAX, the task is so much more challenging when you want to extract from a concentration of CO2 which is like 400 ppm compared to maybe 4 or 10 percentages of CO2 in the smokestack. So DAX is completely a pipe dream compared to CCS.
Thank you for that intervention. Any more question, comment, or clarification? Yes, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. Thanks to our friends, Oli, Almut, and Kwame. I have one question. I want to share some cases from Southeast Asia. I think it's related to the earlier point. I think it who raised it on nature-based solution. Like how are we winning or losing the narrative battle on nature-based solutions? Because like I studied some of the BECS and other carbon farming cases in Southeast Asia. All of them, without exception, are claiming that their technology is nature-based solution. And also the governments that are pushing them. For example, the case of Indonesia, where a big BECS project is about to start in partnership with Marubeni of Japan, which is actually attached to a pulp paper mill um, in Kalimantan. So it's largely packaged as a nature-based solution. So I fully am fully understand our rationale, but the how in terms of wrestling back or reshaping the narrative to put it back in its right track on what nature-based solutions really are or genuinely are. How are we doing that way towards that direction? Also like to take this opportunity to share that there are actually several BECS and many biochar projects, industrial scale biochar projects in Southeast Asia. The BECS project that is mature already is the one that I mentioned earlier, the partnership between Indonesia, the pulp company, and Marubeni. It's actually Japan's Marubeni that owns the pulp paper company Lestari in Kalimantan. So that's quite advanced, and they're hoping to launch that, I think, this year. Um, of course, with biochar, there are a number. But all of them, I would say, without exception, are actually following the logic that Kwame was expounding on, that it's actually the technology is building on existing structural inequalities and structural problems. All of them, the industrial scale biochar facilities are attached to industrial plantation. No, one in Vietnam is attached to a bamboo plantation industrial. Also, the ones in India and also Malaysia, oil palm, for example. And I think it's also worth noting that some of the biochar projects in Southeast Asia are actually being driven by the joint crediting mechanism of Japan, JCM. Japan has this JCM initiative, mainly with developing countries, similar to the former CDM in the UNFCCC, that they actually implement projects, bankroll, finance projects, mainly through loans in developing countries that would gain carbon emission that will mitigate carbon emission, and that Japan and the host country can count in their in their nationally determined contribution and NDCs. And many of these projects that are agriculture based are around biochar and AWD, another carbon farming method. AWD is alternate wetting and drying in rice areas, largely large rice areas. The first biochar that was biochar project that was certified by Puro Earth, for example, that is based on use of rice husk is in the Philippines. That's in partnership with one startup and also an industrial a corporation, and also counted. There's also a startup that moves to count this in the JCM. So I think we have to also look into, apart from the market drivers, we also have to look into UNFCCC drivers for the expansion of carbon farming, in particular biochar and of course BEC. So just to share that. Thanks.
Thanks, Nat, for your contribution on the regional on what's happening in real world in Southeast Asia, and also for questions. So I invite our speakers if you want to share any insights on how the nature-based solutions narrative of whether how if of how we are winning or losing nature-based solutions narrative, as Nef had earlier asked.
I think
Please
I
go
think I think the challenge we have is the narrative battle, because we need to seek a way to change the narrative on our behalf and our interest, because the negotiation in UNFCCC, the way it's going, we are not winning. So we need to find a way to win that battle. So working more on the ground with our governments, I think, is key, and also see how we can continue that mobilization globally as civil society organization to continue counter the narrative. Yeah. So just to say that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kwame. Go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, thank you. I put the land gap report in the chat notes, a link for that. I don't know if you guys know about it, but I think one of the arguments, a killer argument about BECCS is that there's no such thing. You cannot go out and grab the area required to fulfill all the promises of BECS. It's so easy to say, I mean, in a report or in a presentation that, hey, we can just do BECS because we can pull out the carbon from the atmosphere and bury it below ground. But the requirements in order to have just 1 gigaton captured and buried that way is so huge, and there's no way you can go out and find that, and so it will be the only way is by a new form of colonialism, as you put it, Kwame. And I think this is a real weak point, plus the technical weak point, of course, also that it has not been proven till today that you can make it work, that you can really capture large scale from a biomass plant.
Thank you everyone for your interventions. We unfortunately ran out of time. So just to formally close this session, I would like to invite everyone, if you haven't yet, to please sign our renewed manifesto against geoengineering, where we also cover carbon markets, nature-based solutions, and land based geoengineering. And yeah, let's stay in touch. Thank you very much to our speakers, Kwame, Oli, Amut. Thank you for everyone who made their contributions and interventions during the discussion part, and for staying on to the very end of this webinar. And also would like to thank our interpreters who are always there to support us during our virtual events. So thank you very much, everybody. And there's a second session this afternoon, later during your day. where there will be a slightly different projects that will be covered. So we invite your colleagues to join that as well and share the invitation there to your networks. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Cory.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Thanks, Nikki.